Zoe, a highly trained operative, is sent to Seoul on Valentine's Day to assassinate Jae-hoon Lee, the ruthless head of a powerful Korean syndicate. Disguised as an elite server at a private club, she corners him in a dark hallway, but her mission shatters when Jae-hoon doesn't fight back. He looks at her with a haunting recognition that paralyzes her. Instead of killing him, she finds herself drawn into his dangerous world of high-rise penthouses and protection. As Jae-hoon begins a relentless, obsessive pursuit to claim her as his own, Zoe must decide between her lethal duty and the avenging angel, who treats her like a queen. The silver blade of the dagger was hidden beneath a bouquet of red roses, its edge as cold as the February air. Zoe's heart pounded against her ribs, but her hand remained steady, until she looked into the eyes of the man she was sent to kill. Jae-hoon Lee didn't reach for his gun. He didn't call his guards. He simply stood there in his tailored suit, blood from a previous encounter still staining his cuffs, and whispered her name like a secret he'd been keeping his entire life. Something shifted in that dark hallway, something dangerous, something that would change everything. Welcome to Dora's Love Diary, where love is the most dangerous mission of all. If you believe that even a hit woman can find her soulmate, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We love our global community. Let us know in the comments which city or country you are watching from right now. The streets of Seoul were a blur of neon lights and Valentine's Day cheer, but for Zoe Akapo, the atmosphere was merely a backdrop for a lethal objective. She didn't come to South Korea for the sightseeing. She came for Jae-hoon Lee. In her hand, she clutched a bouquet of deep red roses, a classic Valentine's gesture that hid a custom-forged steel dagger within its stems. She had spent 3 months studying his movements, his routines, and the way his men looked at him with a terror that bordered on worship. Jae-hoon wasn't just a businessman. He was the Mafia king of the city's underworld, a man who built his empire on blood and fear. The club was packed, the music pounding through Zoe's chest as she navigated the crowded dance floor in a sleek emerald silk dress that allowed her to blend into the elite crowd. She watched him from across the room. Jae-hoon sat in a VIP booth like a king on a throne, perfectly tailored in a white suit that seemed too pristine for a man with his reputation. When he stood up to head toward a private hallway, Zoe followed, her heart a steady, professional rhythm. She turned down the dark corridor, expecting to find him alone. Instead, she witnessed the very thing the rumors had warned her about. Jae-hoon had a man pinned against the wall, a gun pressed firmly to the back of the traitor's head. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and ozone. Zoe froze. This was her opening. His back was turned. He was distracted. She reached into the roses, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the hilt. But before she could strike, the traitor pleaded for his life, and Jae-hoon spoke. His voice wasn't the roar of a monster, but a quiet, deadly whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "You thought you could touch what is mine?" Jae-hoon asked. In that split second, Jae-hoon pulled the trigger. The muffled sound echoed in the narrow space. As the body fell, Jae-hoon turned around, the white of his shirt now splattered with crimson. His eyes, dark and dangerous, immediately locked onto Zoe. Everything stopped. Zoe didn't scream. She stared into the eyes of the man she was meant to kill, expecting him to raise his weapon at her. Instead, his hand trembled as he lowered the gun. Something shifted in his expression, a look of haunting recognition, as if he had been waiting his whole life just to say her name. "Zoe," he whispered, the name sounding more like a prayer than a threat. Before she could process how he knew her name, or why she couldn't bring herself to draw her blade, heavy hands grabbed her from behind. A cloth covered her mouth, and the world began to tilt into darkness. The last thing she saw was Jae-hoon reaching out for her, his face a mask of possessive fury as the shadows swallowed her whole. Zoe woke to the rhythmic sound of a ticking clock and the scent of expensive sandalwood. Her wrists weren't bound to a rough wooden chair in a warehouse this time, but rested against the cool, high-thread count silk of a massive bed. The room was a masterclass in minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering sprawl of Seoul at night, a view that signaled ultimate status. As her vision cleared, she saw him. Jae-hoon Lee sat in an armchair across the room, His white shirt changed, his posture like a king on a throne. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, watching her with an intensity that felt more invasive than a blade. "You should have stayed in the club, Zoe," he said, his English perfect and low. Zoe sat up, her hand instinctively reaching for the thigh holster hidden beneath her silk dress. It was gone. "How do you know my name, and why am I here?" Jaehoon stood, his movements fluid and predatory. He stepped into the light, showing a jawline that looked carved from stone. "I've known your name since the moment you landed at Incheon 3 months ago. You're a graduate in international business from Atlanta, or so your papers say. But business graduates don't carry custom-forged daggers in bouquets of roses." He stopped at the edge of the bed, looming over her. Zoe felt the dangerous curiosity the agency had warned her about. She should have been terrified, but his presence felt like a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. "My men wanted to dispose of you the moment they saw you witness that unpleasantness in the hallway," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "They saw a witness. I saw a responsibility." "I'm not your responsibility," Zoe hissed, backing away until her shoulders hit the headboard. "I'm a threat to you. You saw the knife. You know why I'm here." For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his dark eyes. He leaned down, his face so close she could feel the heat of his breath. "You're brave, foolish, but brave. You came here to kill a monster, but you couldn't pull the trigger." He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw with a reverence that felt like a prayer. "You think you're the hunter, Zoe. In this city, I am the hunter. But for you, I will be the cage. A gilded one, perhaps, but I will make sure no one else even looks at you wrong." He pulled a black card from his pocket and set it on the nightstand. "I'm sorry you were frightened tonight," he whispered, his voice sending shivers down her spine. "Sleep. My men are at the door, not to keep you in, but to keep the world out." As he walked toward the door, Zoe found her voice. "What do you want from me, Jaehoon?" He paused, his hand on the handle, looking back over his shoulder. "I don't know yet, but until I do, you belong to me, not because of a contract, but because you feel it too." The door clicked shut, leaving Zoe alone with the glittering city and the terrifying realization that her target had just become her captor, and she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. The morning light in the penthouse was blinding, reflecting off the glass towers of Gangnam like a sea of diamonds. Zoe stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the sprawling city she was supposed to be hiding in. She felt the weight of the black card Jaehoon had left her, its gold-embossed lettering a constant reminder of the responsibility he had claimed over her life. The doors to the suite opened, and Jaehoon walked in, looking like he hadn't slept a second. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that bore the faint, jagged scars of a life lived in the shadows. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood by the kitchen island, watching her. "I have a meeting," he finally said, his voice gravelly. "You stay here. My men will bring you whatever you need. Clothes, food, equipment." "I don't need equipment," Zoe countered, turning to face him. "I need to know what happens when my agency realizes I haven't completed the contract. They don't like loose ends, Jaehoon. If I don't kill you, they'll send someone who will, and they'll kill me for the failure." Jaehoon stepped closer, his presence expanding to fill the room. "Let them try. I've built an empire on the bodies of men who thought they could take what belongs to me. You are under my protection now, Zoe. That means anyone who even thinks about hurting you has to go through me first." "I'm not a damsel in distress," she snapped, her pride as an elite operative stinging. "I was trained to be the wolf, not the lamb." "And yet," Jaehoon murmured, closing the distance until he was inches away. "The wolf found herself caught in a trap of her own making. You couldn't kill me because you saw something in me that you recognize, a darkness that matches your own." He reached out, his fingers grazing the silk of her sleeve. "Stay in the penthouse. I've had my team scrub your digital footprint. As far as the world is concerned, Zoe Akapo doesn't exist anymore. You are a ghost in my house." "And what am I to you?" she whispered, the proximity making her heart race in a way no mission ever had. "A trophy, a witness you're keeping quiet." Jaehoon's gaze traveled over her face, his expression softening into something dangerously close to affection. "You are the first thing in 10 years that hasn't felt like a transaction. You are a mystery I intend to solve." He left before she could respond, the heavy click of the lock echoing through the room. Zoe spent the afternoon packing the perimeter of her gilded cage. She checked the vents, the security cameras, and the reinforced glass. It was a fortress. By evening, a package arrived. Inside was a new laptop, top of the line, and a note in elegant script. "I noticed your old one was tracked. Use this." She sat at the desk, her fingers hovering over the keys. She should have been looking for a way out, contacting her handlers, or planning a second attempt on his life. Instead, she found herself searching for his name. She read about the Choi Lee merger, the philanthropic galas, and the whispered rumors of a man who ruled the Seoul underworld with a velvet glove over an iron fist. Just as she was closing a tab, her phone, a secure burner she'd hidden, buzzed. It was an unknown number. A single text. "The roses are wilting, Zoe. Finish the job or we finish you." Panic flared in her chest. They were watching. She looked toward the door, then back at the city lights. She was trapped between a lethal agency and a mafia king who whispered her name like a prayer. As the sun set, the elevator chimed. Jae-hoon returned, but he wasn't alone. He was covered in the scent of rain and gunpowder. He walked straight to her, his hand reaching for her waist with a possessive grip that felt both like a threat and a sanctuary. "They're here, aren't they?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for the truth. Zoe nodded slowly. "They sent a message." Jae-hoon's jaw tightened, a dark, biblical rage flickering in his eyes. "Then the games are over. From this moment on, you don't leave my side. If they want you, they'll have to burn this city to the ground to get to us." The penthouse felt smaller now, the air charged with the static of an impending storm. Jae-hoon didn't waste a second. He began making calls in rapid-fire Korean, his voice a low, melodic growl that commanded an invisible army. Zoe watched him, realizing that the protection he offered wasn't just security guards at a door, it was total surveillance of the city. "We're moving," he said, hanging up. He grabbed a heavy tactical jacket and tossed it to her. "My men intercepted a cleaning crew 2 blocks away. They weren't here to scrub floors. They were your agency's extraction team." Zoe felt a cold sweat prickle her skin. "If they're that close, nowhere in Seoul is safe, Jae-hoon. You're putting your own men at risk for a woman who was sent to end you. Why?" Jae-hoon stopped, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. He walked toward her until their chests almost touched. "Because for the last 10 years, everyone I've met has wanted something from me. Power, money, a favor. You're the only one who came for my life, and then you hesitated. You gave me a gift I haven't had in a decade, Zoe. You gave me a choice." He led her to a private elevator that bypassed the lobby, descending into a sub-garage where a fleet of black SUVs waited, engines idling like purring beasts. As they sped through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, Zoe saw the Mafia king in his element. He wasn't just a man, he was a general. Suddenly, a silver sedan swerved in front of their lead vehicle. Tires screeched, glass shattered. The cleaning crew had found them. "Stay down!" Jae-hoon roared, shoving Zoe toward the floorboards as bullets peppered the reinforced glass of the SUV. Zoe didn't stay down. Her training took over. She kicked open the door as the car skidded to a halt, rolling onto the asphalt. She saw 2 operatives emerging from the sedan, suppressed weapons raised. She reached into her hidden ankle holster, a backup Jae-hoon's men had missed, and fired 2 precise shots. The operatives dropped. Jae-hoon emerged from the other side of the car, his own weapon roaring. He moved with a terrifying, biblical grace, eliminating threats with a cold efficiency that made Zoe's heart skip a beat. When the silence returned, punctuated only by the sizzle of rain on hot engines, Jae-hoon turned to her. He looked at the smoking gun in her hand, then at the bodies of the men who were once her colleagues. The avenging angel didn't look angry, he looked impressed. He walked over, took the gun from her trembling hand, and tucked it into his waistband. "I told you," he whispered, wiping a smudge of road grit from her cheek. "You were trained to be a wolf, but even a wolf needs a pack." He pulled her into a hard, possessive embrace right there in the middle of the wreckage. For the first time, Zoe didn't fight the feeling. She leaned into the scent of gunpowder and rain, realizing that the mission was dead. She was no longer an assassin, and he was no longer just a target. They were two monsters who had found a home in each other. "They'll send more," Zoe whispered against his chest. "Let them," Jaihoon replied, his voice vibrating with a dark, protective promise. "I've been looking for an excuse to show this city why I wear the crown. Tonight, we stop running." The return to the penthouse felt different. It was no longer just a gilded cage or a high-tech fortress. It was a sanctuary in a world that had collectively decided they were enemies. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the chaos they had just escaped on the streets of Seoul. Jaihoon stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. He had discarded his jacket, and the white silk of his shirt was damp, clinging to the muscles of his back. Zoe watched him from the center of the room, her own heart still racing from the adrenaline of the shootout. The Black Virgin label the agency had used to describe her innocence felt like a lifetime ago. Tonight, she had shed blood for him. "You're bleeding," she said softly, noticing a dark stain blossoming on his shoulder where a stray fragment of glass or metal had grazed him. Jaihoon didn't turn around. "It's nothing. I've had worse from men half as capable as you." Zoe walked toward him, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched his arm. "Let me help you, please." He turned then, and the look in his eyes was no longer that of a mafia king or a general. It was the look of a man who was starving for the very thing he was afraid to touch. He allowed her to lead him to the edge of the massive bed, the same bed where she had woken up as his captive. As Zoe cleaned the wound with a steady hand, the air between them thickened. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with everything they hadn't said. The mission, the agency, the contract, it all faded into the background, leaving only the heat of his skin and the intensity of his gaze. "Why didn't you kill me in that hallway?" Jaihoon asked, his voice a low vibration that seemed to echo in her bones. "You had the opening, you were trained for it." Zoe paused, her hand resting near his collarbone. "I saw your eyes. You didn't look like a target. You looked like someone who was waiting for an end, or a beginning. I couldn't be the one to give you the end." Jaihoon reached up, his hand covering hers. He pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees. The power dynamic shifted in an instant. He wasn't the hunter, and she wasn't the prey. They were two broken pieces finally clicking together. "Tonight is Valentine's Day," he whispered, his thumb tracing the pulse point in her wrist. "The world thinks we are celebrating love, but we are celebrating survival." "Is there a difference for people like us?" Zoe asked. Jaihoon stood up, his height looming over her, but his touch was incredibly gentle as he cupped her face. "There is now." He leaned down, and when his lips finally met hers, it wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a surrender. It was the taste of iron and rain, of forbidden desire and absolute possession. Zoe felt the walls she had built around her heart crumble. She had been sent to take his life, but in his arms she felt like she was finally living it. As they moved toward the bed, the assassination contract was forgotten. This was the twist in the title. The gift she was giving him wasn't just her body, but her loyalty and her soul. In the dim, cinematic lighting of the penthouse, the Korean Mafia king and the woman sent to kill him became one. Outside, the agency was regrouping. The war was coming. But inside, for the first time in their violent lives, there was peace. The morning after was silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the eerie quiet before a landslide. Zoe stood on the balcony, watching the mist roll over the Han River. She felt different. The Black Virgin the agency had sent to kill a monster was gone. In her place was a woman who had seen the monster's soul and decided to stay. But as the sun rose, the reality of her betrayal began to sink in. She knew how the agency worked. They wouldn't just send more hitmen, they would go after everyone she had ever known. She began to pack a small bag, her movements mechanical and cold. "Where are you going?" Jaihoon's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, his chest bare, looking more human and more vulnerable than he ever had. "I have to disappear, Jae-hoon," Zoe said, not looking at him. "If I stay, I'm a beacon for them. They'll bring a war to your doorstep that even you can't win. I've already failed the mission. I won't be the reason you lose your empire." Jae-hoon walked over, his footsteps heavy on the floor. He grabbed her wrist, stopping her mid-motion. "You think I care about the empire? I've spent my life building walls to keep people out. I didn't realize I was just building a prison for myself until you showed up." "Jae-hoon, be realistic." "I am being realistic," he interrupted, his voice dropping to that dangerous, possessive register. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small, velvet box. He didn't get on one knee. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply opened it to reveal a ring with a diamond as black as the night they met. "You came here to take my life," he said, taking her hand. "Instead, you saved it. This isn't just a ring, Zoe, it's a declaration. As long as you wear this, you aren't an assassin or a fugitive. You are the queen of the Lee family. My men will die for you. My rivals will fear you. And I will belong to you." Zoe looked at the ring, then at the man who had gone from her target to her protector in less than 48 hours. The flight she had planned felt like a coward's way out. "If I put this on," she whispered, "there's no going back. We'll be fighting the whole world." Jae-hoon slipped the ring onto her finger, the cold metal feeling like a brand. "Then let the world come. They've never seen a king and queen with nothing left to lose." The moment was shattered by the buzzing of Jae-hoon's secure phone. He answered, his face turning to stone. He looked at Zoe, his grip on her hand tightening. "My contacts in the port," he said. "The agency didn't send a team this time. They've hired the Park Syndicate, my biggest rivals. They've offered them my territory in exchange for your head and my heart." The flight was over. The war had officially moved from the shadows into the light. The grand ballroom of the Lot Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk, expensive champagne, and whispered secrets. This was the annual Red Heart Gala, the most prestigious event in Seoul's high society, where the line between legitimate business and the criminal underworld blurred into a haze of gold leaf and classical music. Jae-hoon stood at the top of the marble staircase, looking every bit the Mafia king in a midnight black tuxedo. But tonight, he wasn't the center of attention. All eyes were on the woman at his side. Zoe was breathtaking in a gown of crimson lace that clung to her curves like a second skin, her dark skin glowing under the crystal chandeliers. On her finger, the black diamond caught the light, a silent defiance to everyone in the room. "They think you are my captive," Jae-hoon whispered, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "They expect to see a girl who is broken. Show them they are wrong." As they descended into the crowd, the air seemed to chill. Members of the Park Syndicate, Jae-hoon's rivals, watched from the shadows of the pillars, their hands twitching near their jackets. They knew the agency had put a price on Zoe's head. They saw her not as a woman, but as a billion-won bounty. The tension broke when Di-young Park, the head of the rival family, stepped forward. He was an older man with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that held no mercy. "Jae-hoon," he croaked, glancing at Zoe with a sneer. "I heard you picked up a new hobby, but I didn't realize you were willing to risk your entire territory for a failing asset." Zoe felt the wolf inside her stir. She didn't hide behind Jae-hoon. She stepped forward, meeting Di-young's gaze with the cold, calculated stare of the elite assassin she had been trained to be. "An asset is only failing if it can be bought," Zoe said, her voice steady and echoing through the sudden silence of the ballroom. "I wasn't bought. I chose. And in my experience, a man who relies on someone else's contract to do his dirty work is the one who is truly bankrupt." The room gasped. Jae-hoon's hand tightened on her waist, not in warning, but in pride. He leaned in, his voice loud enough for the surrounding rivals to hear. "The Park Syndicate has 24 hours to withdraw their claim on my wife. If a single one of your men is seen within a mile of her, I won't just take your territory. I will erase your name from the history of this city." It was a declaration of war disguised as a social pleasantry. As the music resumed, Zoe and Jae-hoon danced. It was a slow, intimate movement, their bodies pressed together in the center of a room full of people who wanted them dead. "You were magnificent," Jae-hoon murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I learned from the best," Zoe replied. But as she looked over his shoulder, she saw a waiter, a man with the unmistakable, robotic posture of an agency cleaner, reaching into a serving tray that held no food. "Jae-hoon," she whispered, her body tensing. "The balcony now." Before the assassin could draw his weapon, Jae-hoon swung Zoe behind him, his own suppressed pistol appearing in his hand as if by magic. The scandalous gala was about to become a bloodbath. The gala ended not with a toast, but with the roar of engines and the smell of sulfur. Jae-hoon and Zoe managed to escape the ballroom under a hail of gunfire, but the agency and the park syndicate had played their trump card. They didn't just want a shootout, they wanted to break the Mafia king by taking his most precious possession. During the high-speed chase through the neon-drenched streets of Seoul, their lead vehicle was rammed by a heavy-duty truck. In the chaos and smoke, Zoe was separated from Jae-hoon's main security detail. Before she could recover, a sedative-laced dart found its mark in her neck. The last thing she saw through her blurring vision was Di-young Park's men dragging her into the back of a van, while Jae-hoon screamed her name, held back by a wall of fire and rival soldiers. Zoe woke up in the one place she feared most, a shipping container at the Incheon docks, the very place where the agency cleaned their mistakes. She was bound to a metal chair, her red gala dress torn and stained. Di-young Park sat across from her, a tablet in his hand showing a live feed of Jae-hoon's empire being dismantled, his warehouses burning, his men being slaughtered in the streets. "He is coming for you, you know," Di-young sneered, his voice echoing against the steel walls. "And that is exactly why you are going to die. A king who chooses a woman over his crown is a king who deserves to lose both." Zoe looked at the camera lens in the corner of the container. She knew Jae-hoon was watching. She didn't look like a victim, she looked like a challenge. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice raspy but cold. "You didn't just steal his wife. You stole the only thing keeping the monster inside him on a leash." Back at the penthouse, Jae-hoon was no longer the elegant businessman. He stood in the center of his war room, dressed in tactical gear, his eyes reflecting a biblical rage that terrified even his most loyal lieutenants. He wasn't planning a rescue, he was planning an execution. "I want the docks leveled," Jae-hoon commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "I want the park name erased by sunrise. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will turn this city into a graveyard." The price of power was being paid in blood. Jae-hoon arrived at the docks not with a parley, but with an army. The air was filled with the sound of heavy machinery being used as cover and the relentless rhythm of gunfire. Jae-hoon moved through the shipping containers like an avenging ghost, ignoring the bullets grazing his armor. He reached the container just as Di-young raised a silenced pistol to Zoe's head. "Drop it," Jae-hoon said. Stepping into the light, he wasn't holding a gun, he was holding a detonator. "I've rigged the entire pier. We all go together or she walks out with me." Di-young hesitated, seeing the madness in Jae-hoon's eyes. In that split second of doubt, Zoe used her hidden training to tip her chair back, slamming into Di-young's shins. Jae-hoon lunged. The container erupted in a blur of violence. When the dust settled, Jae-hoon was kneeling in the blood of his enemies, his trembling hands frantically untying Zoe's wrists. "I'm here," he whispered, pulling her into his chest. "I've got you." Zoe held on to him, the black diamond on her finger glinting in the dim light of the warehouse. They had survived the kidnapping, but the cost was absolute. Jae-hoon's underworld empire was in ruins, and the agency was still out there. To save her, he had burned his world down. 6 months had passed since the night the Incheon docks burned. The underworld of Seoul was still whispering about the Valentine's Day massacre. But for Jae-hoon Lee, that life felt like a ghost story from another man's past. He had kept his promise. He dismantled the violent arms of the Lee syndicate, transitioning his remaining influence into legitimate global shipping and international business, the very field Zoe had studied before the agency turned her into a weapon. The agency, realizing that hunting a billionaire with nothing to lose was a suicide mission, had finally gone silent. Zoe was no longer a target. She was a legend. The setting sun painted the walls of their new home, a quiet villa in the hills overlooking the city, in shades of soft amber. Jae-hoon stood in the center of a sun-drenched nursery, his large, scarred hands looking incredibly gentle as he adjusted a silk blanket. In his arms was a tiny, sleeping bundle, their daughter. Zoe watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with a peace she once thought was impossible for people like them. She walked over, resting her head on Jae-hoon's shoulder. "She has your stubborn jaw," Zoe whispered, looking at the infant. Jae-hoon turned to her, his dark eyes no longer filled with the biblical rage of a Mafia king, but with a deep, soulful clarity. "And she has her mother's eyes. She is the only contract I care about fulfilling now." He leaned down, kissing Zoe's forehead. He had traded his guns for a future and his crown for a family. The man who was once death itself had found life in the arms of the woman sent to take it. "What should we name her?" Zoe asked softly. Jae-hoon looked at his wife, the woman who had seen his darkness and chose to be his light. "Valentina," he said, "to remind us that on the day we were meant to end, we actually began." Zoe smiled, tears of joy reflecting the light of the soul sunset. "Valentina Lee, it's perfect." As the city below began to glow with neon, the former monster held his redemption in his arms. Love hadn't just changed their lives, it had rewritten their souls. The mission was over, and for the first time they were finally free. In the world of shadows, love is the ultimate risk, but for Zoe and Jae-hoon, it was the only one worth taking. Their story reminds us that no matter how dark our past may be, the right person can help us build a future filled with light. Love truly has no borders, and it can bloom even in the heart of danger. Thank you so much for joining us for this intense Afro-Korean romance journey. If you enjoyed seeing the monster find his redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more epic stories of passion and protection. Before you go, we want to hear from our incredible global family. Let us know in the comments below which city or country you are watching from right now. We love seeing where our stories travel. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love.